Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're diving into a question that sounds, well, kind of impossible, right? How can one person's broken heart actually end up changing the world?
Well, we're going to find out by looking at the incredible story of the Nobel Prize-winning poet William Butler Yeats. You'll see how his decades, yes, decades of unrequited love became this creative engine that not only shaped modern art and helped build a nation, but also gave us the exact words we still use to describe chaos itself.
So let's set the scene. The year is 1889. A 24-year-old poet, W.B. Yeats, meets Maud Gonne. She's 23, an heiress, and, this is the important part, a fiery, passionate Irish revolutionary. And this one meeting, it's going to set the course for his entire life.
You know, the crazy thing is, Yeats knew it, right from the get-go. Looking back, he literally called this the moment his life's trouble began. He saw right away that they were just fundamentally, painfully different.
And I mean, just look at this. They were polar opposites. He's this introverted poet, off in his own world of mysticism and literature. She, on the other hand, is a hardcore activist, totally laser-focused on one thing, Irish independence. It's like they weren't even living on the same planet.
So you can probably guess how this went. This massive gap between them led to, well, basically a decade of him just chasing a ghost. He proposed to her for the first time in 1891, and then again and again and again over the next 10 years. And every single time, she said no.
And his poetry from this time? Oh man, it's just dripping with this heartbreak. He basically says, look, I'm a poor poet. I have nothing to give you, except for my dreams. And that feeling gives us one of the most beautiful, raw lines ever written.
And then, just when you think it can't get any worse, comes the knockout punch. In 1903, the love of his life marries someone else. And not just anyone, but a hardline nationalist named John McBride. And to really twist the knife, she converts to Catholicism for him, basically building this huge spiritual and ideological wall between her and Yeats, who was Protestant.
Okay, so where does all that pain go? All that energy, all that heartbreak? It has to go somewhere, right? It doesn't just vanish. For Yeats, it got channeled. It was transformed into this new explosive purpose that would literally help shape a nation.
He poured that energy into things like the Abbey Theatre. And you gotta understand, this wasn't just putting on plays for fun. This was a huge cultural mission. The whole point was to wake up the Irish spirit, to build a national identity through myths and stories that had absolutely nothing to do with Britain.
And you know what happens when you stir up that much national pride? Sooner or later, it spills over from art into reality. In 1916, it exploded with the Easter Rising, a full-blown rebellion against British rule in Dublin. It was crushed and the leaders were executed. And one of those leaders? Yep, Maud Gonne's husband, John McBride.
So how do you even describe a moment like that? Yeats did it with maybe the most famous line in all of English literature. He saw the absolute horror of the violence, but he also saw the birth of this new, powerful idea of independence, a terrible beauty. It's just perfect.
But it wasn't just about beautiful lines. This event hit him hard with a wave of guilt. He started asking himself this terrifying question. Did his romantic plays, his nationalist art, did they send these young men out to get shot? He felt the blood on his hands, on his pen.
All right, so let's zoom out a bit, because all this personal drama, all this national chaos, it was happening while the entire world felt like it was falling apart.
I mean, just try to imagine being alive in 1919. World War I has just ended, leaving an entire continent in ruins. The Spanish flu is sweeping the globe, killing millions. And back home in Ireland, a brutal war for independence is kicking off. It must have felt like the apocalypse.
So, right in the middle of all this chaos, Yeats and his wife, Georgie, he got married in 1917, they come up with this mystical theory of history. They called it the gyre. Think of it like a spinning top. It starts off tight and fast, but as it winds down, it gets wider and more chaotic until it just collapses. Yeats thought that's what civilizations did, in 2,000-year cycles.
And this dark cosmic idea gives us his most famous poem, The Second Coming, and those absolutely iconic opening lines. That phrase has become our go-to shorthand for when it feels like society is completely breaking down, when the rules just don't apply anymore.
And here we are, more than 100 years later, and those words are everywhere. You hear them in novels, in movies, on TV. Why? Because they nail that primal fear we all have when the world feels like it's spinning out of control. It's not a comfort, it's a diagnosis, and it's terrifyingly accurate.
So all this work, born from so much personal and political pain, it eventually gets him the highest honor a writer can receive. But that recognition, it sets the stage for one final, absolutely unbelievable twist.
So, in 1923, Yeats wins the Nobel Prize in Literature. And this wasn't just a win for him. For the brand new Irish Free State, this was huge. It was like a stamp of approval, a validation of their culture on the world stage.
Fast forward to 1939. Yeats dies in France, but he leaves behind some very specific instructions. He wanted his body to be brought back to Ireland years later, after the world had forgotten him a bit, and buried under this stark, philosophical epitaph. It's basically telling us to look at life and death with a clear, unsentimental eye.
Well, bringing the great poet's body home actually became a huge national project after World War II, but the person put in charge of it all, this is where the story gets truly incredible.
So the whole thing was personally handled by Ireland's Minister for External Affairs at the time, a man by the name of Sean McBride. And if that last name is ringing a bell, well, it absolutely should. You ready for this? Sean McBride was the son of Maud Gonne, the woman Yeats loved his entire life, and John McBride, the man she married instead. The actual child born from his greatest heartbreak and rejection grew up to be the statesman who brought the poet's body home for its final rest. I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
It's like history itself wrote the perfect, poetic, ironic ending to his story. Which leaves us with one final question, one that Yeats himself asked. In a world full of crisis, is poetry just a useless escape? Or is it something else? Is it a weapon? The most powerful, slowest bomb that just takes 50 years to finally change the world?